buying most of it. This allowed me to have fresh salads and green peppers, and the first year I had green beans trained all the way to over there, so it was like this nice little shaded area. And it was really easy and not a lot of weeds, and so we added these different bucket beds where we just, it's like a wicking bucket, but it has an overflow. Some of them feed back into the aquaponics system. And it made everything really easy because I could just walk out before dinner and go snip, 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 and then cook something. And that's what I did for 2 years. And then this year we discovered Kratky hydroponics. And I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, maybe I can beat the tomato blight, because what's happened since my first year is no matter how much I rotate tomatoes around or protect them from the dirt, I get late season blight. And I thought, well, I'll get some blight resistant varieties. I'll grow the couple of heirloom varieties I just really like to grow, and if they die, they die. But let's get them completely out of the dirt. So then I talked about it on the podcast, did the plans for this system, and I had stopped thinking about let's do stuff because of how it's supposed to be done or where it's supposed to be, and think about why I would. These serve two functions. You know what this is? What the two functions are? Shade and food. So the screened-in porch, because this is south-facing, gets brutal hot in August. And so you don't even want to go out the door to do anything, right? Now, I've got this wall of food growing, and it's shading in there. When I drew up the plans, I was like, I'm going to build this system, and I shared my plans with Tactical Redneck, and guess who built the system? It was not I. He ended up taking over the project, and his design was a little different than mine. And once he started, it was very clear he was the one who had to finish. Because jumping in halfway through somebody else's design is never good. So he, Jack and I were kind of on the same wavelength with the whole bucket system. But we thought, you know, we want to know, is it better to grow in pipes with constantly flowing water or buckets, right? So we said, well, plant them side by side and see. So these, if you want to look, you can come up here. The water level's still pretty high in here. And the water's constantly flowing through, then out the drain and into the sump. And this, because the valve is closed, keeps the water level at this height, okay? Ultimately, I need to train it down to this height so they have more oxygen in there. But when I started doing it about a week before the workshop, they get really wilty. And so I need to raise it up and down manually as they get just used to the difference. And I decided with all y'all here, I was going to forget. And I was going to lose my tomatoes. So I just decided to leave it high for the system. But in order to protect these from the splashback from dirt, which is blight, we decided a row of something here, and I thought strawberries would be nice. And basil. And this is fed with the same water. So the water comes in at this end, it's just constantly flowing through this hose, and then it drains over here. And Tactical likes to add accesses everywhere, so you can just kind of look in here. If you look, you'll see the water, if you want to look.
There's water in it.
The benefit of this particular access is it's right before the sump, so when I need to add nutrients, I can do it. This year I'm using Texas tomato food, and I've been reading about making worm casting tea and just using that. Next year I'm hoping to be able to experiment with that. That has more steps for me, right? It starts with getting the worms and the worm. Haven't done any of that. Haven't really messed with that. He has a question in to stump the sauce, and he's succeeded in stumping her because she does not know anything about worms other than they come out of the ground when I dig, right? And I give them food. So I'm gonna ask somebody who knows for you. But that makes it really easy because it goes from here into the sump and has a chance to dilute in the sump and then out. The one thing I wish that we had done that we can still do is to have pre-mixed solution in an overflow bucket that when that level gets down, it'll automatically fill up. Because if you look in here, the water level, I like to keep it about that far below the drains. if you get the water level up here to the drains, what happens is it siphons everything out and makes an entire huge mud pit here. Ask me how I know. Also, this grass is going to grow really well this year. Okay. So I wish I had a float valve so that I can be gone longer, because this week I've topped it 3 times. And yeah, so it's now that they're this big and they're setting fruit, they're using a lot of water. Before, it would go 2 weeks before it needed water. But the cool thing about it is it's only using the water it needs, except for when I do the siphon thing. But in theory, it's only using the water it needs. And you can see it's doing great. I don't know, how are your, Sean, where are your tomatoes? Are they at this point? Something about moving water.
My tomatoes look like yours did when you put them in there.
Okay.
How old are those?
I started my tomatoes late this year. There was this moment where I said everything will stop and I will put seeds into the indoor seed growing system so that we have some plants about this tall in time for the spring workshop, which at that time was in April. So it was after April 1st that I started the plants.
Yeah, I was going to say into March maybe. And by seed.
By seed.
Every one of those is started as a seed.
It's all seed.
Did you start them out here as seed?
I started the seed inside. I am going to actually bring you guys inside so you can see that system. I've not harvested it so that you can see what it looks like with plants in it, but they look pretty leggy and bolty right now. But yeah, I started them inside. When I put them out, they were about that tall, and they were out here before the end of April. And then we had that late frost come through in May, and I have pictures online where we stapled plastic and draped it over it and prayed. That's pretty much what we did. But I had enough tomatoes still inside at that point that if they'd all died, you know, I would have just put new plants out. And that's why you see random tomatoes in buckets all over the place that don't look too happy. Those are the backup ones, and that's, I think, an important lesson when you're doing something like this is it's not hard or expensive to start more plants from seed. You have to be willing to let them go when it's time to let them go. But having a backup so if it does frost in May, which it never has done ever since I've lived in Tennessee, you have a backup plan. Oh, back scratcher. So then there's this hillside.
Backup plan.
I needed to replace the French drain here, and again, this was before I learned to instill my own priorities on my property, and the contractor doing it asked me, he said, you know, we could put railroad ties in these neat little diagonal shapes and you'll have this wonderful hillside of flowers. How'd that go for me?
There's a couple flowers.
I got Queen Anne's lace up there. So this has been, until this year, this has been weeds over my head by now, every single year. And I put things in there to grow it, and it dies. But what does grow well, there's plantain, which is up in the back. I think we have some milkweed up there. And other things, I don't want, those Chinese invasive tree things that plant themselves, they grow great there. Box elder, cedar, huh?
Sumac?
It's not sumac, it's like the Chinese sumac that's invasive, that doesn't give you anything useful.
Yeah, we have lots of that.
So last year I was like, you know what? There's some wild edibles that grow up here. I'll just work on that. Here's the problem with this and the creative design. A, I should have solarized it to kill all the seeds in what was there, because it was just there. And it used to be flat and you could mow it. And that's the other problem. I can't mow it. And I have a push whacker, and I can't even push whack it because you end up with these funny shapes, and I can't, you know, I can't maintain this with traditional methods. But if we had just gone step over mower width, step over, it would have been less interesting looking from a shape standpoint, but way easier to manage. This is a type 1 error. This is hard to redo. This is going to cost me $3,000 to $5,000 if I was going to pay somebody to redo it. We may eventually actually pull out some of those railroad ties. Oh, and they're like held in with rebar, like way down. It's like that. I mean, it's not just like they're placed on the ground all pretty. No. No. And the lesson there was I needed to think holistically about how I'm going to maintain it. my goal now is just to get stuff growing that will. So last spring I moved a bunch of wild edibles from other places in the holler up there. Those daylilies, I think we're serving them tonight or tomorrow night in the salad. Those flowers are edible. And they were growing in the shade down there, not flowering. And so in the spring I went out and got a bunch of bulbs where I knew they were, and then put them on the hill, and they did nothing last year, nothing. This year though, they're up. And what'll happen next is they like to spread out, and they're kind of like Jerusalem artichokes. They like to crowd stuff out, and I'd much rather have edible flowers up there than a bunch of, I don't know, you know, and tall weeds and ticks and all of the pests that come with all of that. So we'll see how we do. I've also, you can't tell anymore, but I've planted some marigolds in here and some flowers. This one needs to come out. There's roses. And eventually those will shade the ground. Last year in about half the hill I had sweet potatoes growing, and it was like the one place on the hillside without weeds. So I do have, like, the goal is to just keep shoving in the places where I don't have actual plants like the daylilies, keep shoving in sweet potato slips all summer long and just see how much I can get it to discourage the growth. When we expanded our grow area, originally we were going to put the back garden back into commission, and we do have some things growing up there, but the goat fence is not done yet and requires probably 2 to 3 days of labor that we haven't built into our priority. So I planted beets up here, and I planted squash up there, and it's kind of like if it lives, you can see the beets from here. Can you see them? Right to the right of the daylilies. I weeded those beets. And a miracle happened. I found lamb's quarter. I've been trying to grow lamb's quarter for 14 years here and failing. I'm weeding the beets very carefully by hand because you have to you don't want to disturb the dirt too much. And I saw a lamb's quarter, and I very carefully weeded around the lamb's quarter. So the thing about lamb's quarter is once it takes over, from what I understand, it's usually pretty good at taking over. And that beet patch will hopefully end up being a lamb's quarter patch. And then I have a single thornless blackberry up there that just somebody dropped it off at the wrong time to plant it, and I went thunk right there and hoped it would live last year, and it lived. The weird fencing is just my anti-chicken defense system, because if the chickens get in there, they rip out everything I plant, especially when I have it weeded.
They don't care about the weeds. They just want the stuff to shoot punched.
Yeah, it's weird. They're like, well, you were there. There must be good stuff there. So that does a pretty good job of keeping them out, not 100%, but I haven't had them. We planted several rows of beans this year that the chickens came behind and ate all the seeds. Like, I guess we need another packet of seeds there, but the beans are up now. So just in these areas, the amount of food we can grow is pretty amazing. And I think that's what people don't realize. Like, they tend to go big rather than think about, like, how can I actually get as much out of the tomatoes or whatever as possible. Any questions so far?
What is lamb's quarter good for? I've heard of it, don't know what really it looks
like. Like a green on your salad. I'll show you when we go up the hill. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've heard about it, but...
And spinach in Tennessee is like the 2-week window until it's too hot. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, over here in the aquaponics system, I bought a cilantro plant last year from my friend Connie, and I planted it right here. And it got tall like this, cilantro plant. I guess we call it a coriander plant when it starts seeding like this. So it got tall like this, and it flopped over. And I was just waiting for the seeds to get to the point where I could harvest them and use them for coriander. And I kind of missed the window a little bit, got some, and others fell. And I'm inside in the indoor growing system trying to get cilantro to germinate and grow. And I'm like, this is really frustrating. It was not going well. You have to, like, germinate on a paper towel and then transplant. And I walk outside just to see what's going on out here, and there is just this huge patch of cilantro about that tall. As happy as could be out here, and I was like, okay, game over. Don't fight it. When something like that happens, like cilantro is telling me it likes to be right there, I'm going to let it reseed itself. I'm going to get the coriander. I'll thin it out if it's in my way, but that's done. Once you get a patch going, I let it grow where it's going to grow. And before, what I did 14 years ago, I would try to architect where the things had to be, whether they want. I've killed 90,000 rosemary plants approximately, and I've killed cherry trees and plums and pawpaws because I didn't observe in nature where they're growing here. I have my Oregon perspective, which is a completely different climate, and it just didn't work. And now I know the pawpaws grow on the north-facing hill close down in the ravine. And so putting a pawpaw right here where it gets its beat on by the south sun is a stupid idea. And even on the edge there, it's not going to like it. There's one that has started itself down at the base of my driveway across from the workshop. It's about this tall. And I think it's because it's shady and cool and there's a breeze and there's plenty of water, right? You know, eventually it'll get tall enough to give me pawpaws. So if I'm going to plant a pawpaw, I'm going to put it there. Or I'm going to go guerrilla plant it on not my property where the other, if I want a specific variety, I'll put it where the other pawpaws are because that's where it likes to be. And I think that's the part of any property that's interesting. So I'm going to show you the indoor grow system real quick. Brian and I put it back together, and for the next 2 days, the bees specifically targeted us around the property. Like, he got stung pretty badly. So that had been a cobbled together thing. This stand is much more stable, and then that mean hive swarmed, and I didn't have a hive, but I had a board and I had boxes. And it was so big I had to put 2 boxes, and it was in that tree. So shook them into it. And swarming bees don't sting, by the way, except for those. They got really, really mad again. So I think I had just laid that foundation by rolling the hive. My bees are a little bit more aggressive than your Italian bees. They're caught from a wild swarm nearby, but they're really prolific. The honey that's by the coffee is from these bees. So I just decided I would deal with the fact that they're jerks. And that's about as close as I can mow, and once in a while I get up there with the weed whacker in my bee suit. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, ultimately, so you guys know I started in mason jars, and that worked fine. I just did a, I put them in a tray like this with the light right on top, and then they germinated like this, so you can see. Can you hit the light behind you on the wall?
That one?
Yeah, sure. So you can see, like, it's just basic germination. I cut my grow lights in half. Grow plugs. I don't cut the grow lights in half. It's bad practice to do that. And this is just random mixed lettuce. The ones that haven't germinated are probably dill. This is 30 plugs. So I've been experimenting with how many I need to do at a time to lettuce this place. We're going to try 30 now. And the reason I chose 30 is that my tray takes 30. These are the 3-inch ones. This has 30. So I did 64 the other day, and I had lettuce plants all over the place and nowhere to put them.
That's just a standard bus bucket.
Yeah, and it's a standard bus bucket, and it's because I was trying to do the 2-inch thing. And these look terrible because I haven't maintained them, but the 2-inch, what happens with these is they get leggy and yucky looking, and they're too dense. This is great to go from lettuce plug to this to the 2-inch if you already have something in the 3-inch, and let the roots develop a little bit and then transplant them. But if you're going to grow them this tall in the 2-inch, they get too close to each other, they block out the light, and we're going to make a new top for that that's another 30 cup 3-inch net pot. We could probably do 2-inch net pots, but more space, like 30. We'll probably do that because we have more 2-inch net cups. But so I start here, and then we'll let these get roots, and then I put them in either this or another thing, an interim step. I have lids for these, so these are just bone. I was using using anything I had. So when they go from seedling, they can go to something this shallow while they build roots, and I can do 30 in this, and then they go into the bus trays and they go nuts, right? This is on an 18-hour timer. Thank you. And then of course I'm still using random mason jars for things like peppers that may or may not go outside at this point, just because I haven't. But it's been great. So I have lights on all the shelves, but I don't always have them on if I'm not using the shelf.
Are you using nutrient in those, or is it just water?
Texas tomato. I'm using all. We have the other master blend stuff, which we're gonna have to transition to because Texas tomato food is no longer orderable. And I thought 1 gallon was enough for the year, and it was not. I'm almost out of it, right? And out there, I take an EC meter reading almost every day right now because I'm adding water. So this morning I got up, took some water out, did the EC meter reading. It was about 200 parts per million short.
And what is you
I poured some in.
And what is the EC meter? What are you testing?
It's electric current, and it's looking for the parts per million of the nutrient that's in the water. Yeah.
Electrolytes.
Yeah. I had to learn all that. I had no idea an EC meter existed in January, right? But for maintaining that system out there, it's great because here it's 1.5 teaspoons of Texas tomato food per gallon of water, and I put a cap full of hydrogen peroxide in to keep the algae growth down, and it does a really good job. As long as you maintain it that way, it does a good job. If you get an outbreak, you can put more hydrogen peroxide in. I learned that trick from Brian Norton. And it's because this is not circulating, so it's more likely to grow the algae than the one out there. I've also put some hydrogen peroxide in there because we had a little algae bloom, and I just put a cup of hydrogen peroxide into that system, and it just knocked it out, but it did not knock the plants out. So when this was, like, during COVID, every one of these shelves was growing something, and I had microgreens on top. It was kind of cool, and we were getting plenty. The one thing I did wrong is getting the seedlings on a cycle. And so that's why we're now trying, is 30 the number? Because every time it was like I either had way too many or not enough. And then microgreens saved my rear end because those grow so fast, right? But we're going to try 30 every 2 weeks and see, A, can I really maintain that in my lifestyle? Which is an important question when you're growing your food. And B, does that keep us in the lettuce? We'll eat less lettuce as other things out there come on though. So, questions about this system?
Are your lights, are they fixed locations, so you're just putting those in there and letting the plants climb to the light, or do you adjust the lights on the individual shelves?
Locations. Yeah. Sometimes I'll put something under. I move the bin up, not the lights. That's helpless when people give me plants unannounced. That peach tree, my next door neighbor on this side, handed me some sticks at a really bad time, and I heeled them in. And the intention was to move it. So now we have a peach tree there. And it's never given me peaches. So I've failed at peaches. I don't spray it with the garlic pepper stuff for worms. And unfortunately what that means is this year I'm going to have wormy peaches because yay, I got peaches! Yeah. Usually what happens is it blooms. This puts on flowers later than all the other peach trees I have. So it has a fighting chance. But what has happened in past years is it blooms and then frosts and then I'm done. And I don't try to circulate the air or throw a giant bed sheet over that. I don't even know what you'd throw over that. But
parachute.
What's been nice about having that peach tree there is I can grow shaded stuff under it. You can see the bee balm is like blooming right there. That red flower is bee balm. No.
Now, which one's elderberry?
Elderberry is the white flower, so you
can.
can.
The big tall one. Okay.
That tall one, you can harvest those and bread them and fry them, and it's a fritter. It's like, yeah, and then you put lots of sugar on it. It's totally keto, but it's tasty. We have blueberry bushes back there that won't give blueberries, and then these are filbert trees here. So what happened is I used to cultivate this and I ignored it, and now we just have random perennials. I have Jerusalem artichokes that come in here, and this time I put these beets in, and then the chickens got all in there, and that's why the anti-chicken defense system went up over there, and I shifted fire. Then this row of beans is the one that got eaten once, and I asked Tactical to come out and put cucumbers in the beets. It's Communication's such an interesting thing. I came out and there were cucumbers coming up in my beans. He didn't hear the last word. He knew it started with B. So
Close.
so I have, you can see here I have cucumbers coming up. I'm just sort of, yeah.
Looks like a bean.
Or a scallion.
Oh, I have,
This is it.
yeah.
It-
So,
it's not-
you know,